I trust most of you know by now that for me it's a matter of pride as well as shame that I'm Mr. Sherr and not Dr. Sherr. I intend to remain so. So the honorary doctorates not offered will not be accepted. We are nearing the end, and I thought the most useful thing for me to do, rather than summarize, rather than pick up points and agree with them or disagree with them, is to articulate certain issues which for me are issues of principle and see if they evoke discussion. But I have to pick up one thing, and I'm just reminded that Ariel Cohen is a very honest guy, because I also attended these meetings he referred to, and my recollection of them is exactly the same as his. So I will back that up. First issue of principle, no one's really said this, but I think it's very important to say it and understand it. Ukraine has a right to independence and self-determination, whether it is democratic or not. The fact that my neighbor mismanages his finances does not give me a right to come in and sort them out. The fact that his relations with his children and his wife do not appeal to me does not give me a right to intrude into that either. And I think, and therefore, whatever is happening in Ukraine does not in any way mitigate Russian intentions towards Ukraine, or Russian conduct, if we see worrying conduct, in future. The problem today is that Ukraine makes it very difficult for others to help it. But that need not prevent or deter us from making Moscow understand that if certain lines are crossed, there will be consequences in Russia's relationship with Europe and North America. Second point, good relations between Ukraine and Russia are to be welcomed. They would be profoundly beneficial to Europe, but only if we mean good relations and not brotherly relations. You know the Russian joke. How shall we divide these proceeds? Justly or in a brotherly fashion? Some of you might also know the wonderful Russian question, "Против кого вы дружите?" Against whom are you waging friendship? If these terms were emancipated from their imperial and Soviet context, we would then have something we could openly praise and strengthen. That is to say, if Russia were a country that was hospitable to the ideas of liberal democracy, and those ideas were taking root. If Russia's energy sector were not inseparable from the state, but in fact a broad sector of independent actors operating under checks and balances and legal constraints and proper market disciplines, if Russians, most importantly, there were more Russians like Nalyvaichenko who understood that for all the commonalities between Ukraine and Russia, there are also important differences, and these differences are not artificial, they are not manufactured, they are real. They are as real as differences between England and Ireland, Norway and Sweden, Germany and Austria. They are real, they are rooted in history, culture, and identity, and they are to be respected. And a Russian state, a Russian elite class that understood these things, respected them, and took a totally graciously tolerant view about how Ukraine pursues its own course in Europe and the wider world. Such a Russia would be Ukraine's closest friend, and we should welcome. The third point is this. We need to understand, we sometimes forget it because we write and talk about democracy. re-emphasize it. We particularly emphasize it now in this conference. We need, though, to recall, remember, without good governance, liberal democracy is impossible. And any form of democracy that takes root is likely to be illiberal democracy. Good governance also cannot be discussed without talking about good economic management. And I don't simply mean good macroeconomic management. What I mean is decent economic management on a footing which is very different from that which underpins so much Russian discussion about economic management today. In Russia today, any form of commodity market relations is considered a market, irrespective of how unbalanced, how inequitable, and how monopolistic these relations are. We need to rekindle the notion that markets are about choice of buyer and seller. They are shaped by laws, that the judiciary and the other public and regulatory bodies of the state exist to restrain power and protect the citizen from the excesses and abuses of power, and not to serve as the instrumentalities of power and narrowly define and particular hidden or plan-based interests. Fourth point. In a globalized world, sovereignty continues to matter, and it needs to be respected. And those today who are constantly reminding us of our sovereignty, beginning with the Russian Federation and Ukraine, need to be told, not only do we take your sovereignty seriously, it's about time you did as well. That means we expect you to honor your commitments. Those that you have solemnly entered into with the OSCE and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, to name but some of those commitments. It means that whilst you as a sovereign state make choices, you have to accept that those choices have consequences. And you have to live with them. And not expect others to bear responsibility for the choices you make, for the things you do and decide not to do. And this, we need to remind ourselves of this when we hear the charges we hear repeatedly in various tones, that somehow the EU is blocking Ukraine's path to the EU, whereas it's quite clear Ukraine has decided to stand in the door which is open to it, and is not budging. Russia has every right, whether I like it or not. Russian authorities have every right to say, we have our own traditions, we have our own standards, we have our own understandings of what democracy is and isn't, and we do not have to accept a blueprint that is put together in Brussels as to what that is. Fine, you do have that understanding, but once you make that choice, you then do not have a right to say, we are entitled to sit at the top table of institutions like the EU that are values-based and define themselves in terms of values. The Russians do not have a right to equality inside institutions like the EU or NATO, whose interests they attack and whose values they do not share. And that is a choice. It is not only Russia, as another Valentyn colleague of Ariel's and mine, who is very fond of saying, oh, if you look at the human rights record of Russia, compared to Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, it's marvelous. That's true, but neither Saudi Arabia nor Pakistan are in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and no one would think of inviting them there. And if you say to Russians, tell us the day you'd like us to treat you like Saudi Arabia and just have a very pragmatic, narrow relationship, focused on a few strategic issues, we will. Anybody in Russia would say, no, we don't want that. We're integral to European civilization, we're critical to it. Then please, accordingly. Last point, right, 60 seconds, yes. In a world of sovereignty and national interest, we are entitled to our own interests, particularly those that correspond with our conscience and which are widely respected within the democracies in which we live. And this is the most practical suggestion I will make. For our sake, but also for the sake of others, our partners, the new member states of the EU, those who wish to join the EU, we not only have a right, we have an obligation to enforce our norms, our laws, our standards, our own values in our own jurisdictions. Gazprom does not have a right to come into Europe and say we will invest in Europe according to our rules, in violation or circumvention of your norms, by unconventional, covert methods, and any step you take against us is discrimination. No, quite the opposite. The most effective thing we can do to help Russia, and for that matter Ukraine, define their choices is demonstrate that outside their own domains, their particular fusion of money and power, their business model is not only ineffective and damaging, it is unprofitable. And when we demonstrate that, they will have a discussion about whether they have understood the national interest properly. And that will be beneficial to them and to everybody else. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.